gesels vanoggend met Richard Hay en Jason Sampson. Nou, hulle is altyd verbonde aan Universiteit van Pretoria en ons praat 'n bietjie oor Giving Garden. Dit is 'n inisiatief wat gemeenskapstuiniers help om anders te dink as dit kom by die kweek van eetbare plante. Manne, baie welkom by GROOTplaas. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to talk English and I love that. Tell me a little bit more about Future Africa. Richard, what exactly is Future Africa?
So Future Africa is a transdisciplinary research campus at the University of Pretoria that doubles as a conference facility, but the entire landscape is designed as an edible garden for people to forage from.
Tell me a bit about your background. Why is this a focus and also a passion for you?
So I'm an agronomist by training, but I've always had a deep interest in different types of crops. My grandfather was a maize breeder, but had an extensive vegetable garden growing up, and so that's where my interest comes from. And I'm very passionate about food security for communities, and so I think particularly in the modern era with expanding human populations and urbanization, we need to rethink how we feed people and get a lot of agricultural production into our urban centers to augment the existing system.
Yeah. Jason, nothing is just born out of nothing. So there's always a need and a vision for something. So tell me, what was the vision behind starting the Future Africa Campus Gardens? But also for somebody who hasn't seen it, just paint me a picture. What does it look like?
Okay, so the university maintains a botanical garden for research purposes.
On the campus?
On Hatfield campus, yes. So and we do also have satellite collections like the Psychet collection, which is housed on all of our campuses. So when the opportunity came to start another a satellite collection, we decided to go for orphan crops. So orphan crops are crops that were very important to people before the introduction of modern agriculture. So many of them are quite recognizable, but they're not maize and soya beans.
Yeah.
And we definitely had a look at the orphan crops of Africa because they are under researched. So if I were to paint a picture to you of Future Africa, it's also an aesthetic garden. It looks pretty.
I can imagine.
It's not rows of millies.
Yeah.
We try to pair different sets of plants together to give you a good-looking effect. So a lot of people will walk through there, not actually realize that they're walking through all sorts of crops.
Yeah.
And we have roughly 200 different crop species and etc. there.
Richard, for somebody who might not know, and I'm not going to say it's me, or I will, what are orphan crops and indigenous crops? Just a simple definition to distinguish the two.
So as Jason mentioned, orphan crops are crops that we've grown historically that we now no longer grow on a large scale for various socioeconomic reasons. But they are crops that we still believe have potential for feeding people in alternative agricultural spaces like home gardens, community gardens, and our campus landscape.
Yeah.
The indigenous crops are obviously specifically crops that evolved in Africa and specifically South Africa. So there is a bit of an overlap between the two definitions, and it's something that I'm working on as part of my PhD, defining how we categorize these alternative crops.
What would some of those factors be when it comes to the orphan crops that we stopped farming with them? What would that be?
So in the South African context, I think a good example is tsenza. It's a root vegetable that grows in our grasslands. It was very common in Zulu agricultural systems pre-colonization. But with the arrival of amadumbe, which is actually a Southeast Asian vegetable, which is more productive than tsenza, it replaced tsenza, and we almost lost tsenza in South Africa. So we had to bring some in from Zim to try and start researching this crop that was originally here that we almost lost entirely. A lot of the other crops, something that viewers will be familiar with, is like the ladyfingers bananas.
Yes.
Those really soft, sweet bananas that we grew up eating. Those aren't well suited for long industrial supply chains, and so they don't make a good option for supermarkets, but they are a good option for home production, for example.
Yeah. Why the name choice orphan? Have you ever thought of that?
Yeah, it's part of my research work in actually defining this. I don't particularly like the term, I will admit, and so we are sort of reframing this terminology.
Yeah.
But the original thought process behind the orphan crops is that there is no longer anyone looking after these crops. A lot of these crops are dependent on...
that makes much more sense. Okay.
Exactly.
Yes.
So without us as humans growing these crop species, they are at risk of going extinct.
Jason, I need to know, tell me everything about Giving Garden. That's the name of an initiative, right?
Yes. So Richard and I put our heads together a few years back. How do we actually engage our students more with these crops?
Yeah.
And we repurposed a small section of the main botanical garden on main campus. That botanical garden is about 3.5 hectares. So when I say a small section, it's not that small.
It's not small at all.
And we decided we'd bring some of the more prominent orphan crops from the collections at Future Africa, put them in the Giving Garden, educate people about their use and mass produce them so that we can give propagation material to community gardens and the like. So an example of one of those crops would be walking onions. So walking onions are also an orphan crop in the fact that they've been replaced by onions that are grown from seed. But it takes 2 years to grow onions from seed to making seed.
Yeah.
Whereas these onions don't make seed. They make a flower spike and then they make a bunch of onions on top.
So cool.
Every year. So it falls over and now they're walking all over the place. But in the context of a community garden, people can share their onions. They also proliferate from the base, so they can split them. They've got baby onions on top. Seed need never, ever be involved, nor seedlings. So that's one of our very prominent crops.
Is this garden, is it open to students on campus? How does it practically work? Can you study at Tux and then go look at it, or is it open for the community? Do you get people from the community in to come learn there?
Okay, we plugged into communities in a few different ways. So it is used as a teaching space. Students have multiple projects, and we actually Richard has an entire module of agronomy students working in there at the second part of the year. We also take tour groups through. We've given classes to communities in the Giving Garden when you've got the practical examples in front of you, etc. So, you know, Department of Landscape Architecture is also quite heavily involved in their teaching students. So any opportunity we can get to plug people into this initiative, we use.
I really think that's amazing. You know, thinking ahead. Richard, you spoke about, you know, communities and also food security, which is such an important thing. There can't be a week that goes by without us talking and planning around food security. What is the value of these crops when it's in the hands of communities?
So particularly the types of crops that we focus on, they typically very stress tolerant, so drought tolerant of hot conditions. And so they're a lot easier for beginner growers to grow. Over the years, running a number of training courses, we've learned that the biggest thing with getting new food gardeners to stay consistent is making sure that their motivation is kept up. And obviously if you grow, say, a lettuce and you get it halfway through its growth cycle and it dies, it's really tough for beginner growers. And so we really focus on crops that we can almost guarantee a harvest from. And then a lot of the stuff that we focus on is better suited for more challenging conditions. Obviously, trying to set up food gardens, particularly in urban centres, between buildings, along roadsides, around parking lots, it's very different to large-scale agriculture. And so we're trying to find ways that communities can grow food easily in a fairly tough agricultural environment that traditional crops wouldn't necessarily be well suited for.
Okay.
Something you've just mentioned and that really struck is when we talk about a vegetable garden, we're not just talking about a vegetable garden in your backyard. You're talking about sideways in buildings, because even, what's that term we call, it's like urban farming, I think they call it. It's not just in your backyard. There's so many spaces to bring crops to life, right?
For sure.
And if you've got a wider range of crops, you have more choices. So most traditional crops need full sun. we've got a lot of crops that grow quite well in shade. Most traditional crops need high inputs, fertilizer, pesticides, so forth. The crops that we promote don't. You know, there's 100 examples like it. So another example I can think of is we do push moringa. Okay, but the Indian moringa is a martyr to mouse birds. Mouse birds love it.
Really?
Okay, yeah. But there's an African moringa that is as nutritious that the mouse birds leave alone. You know, it's those little details that make the difference.
I think that's also the value of research, because how would we have known?
No, for sure.
So I always like to bring it back practically. If we have somebody, a beginner when it comes to growing their own vegetable garden, what would that one crop or that crop collection that you guys have seen, you know, they work perfectly together, what would that be? What's a good, I almost want to say a good starter pack for somebody who urgently needs, I mean, it can't fail. It can't fail. So
this
lay
is
it down on the table for us.
It's something we're actually developing as an almost instant starter pack of crops that we think will work well in almost any condition, that will provide nutrients and a wide range of meals from. But I think if we had to pick a crop for any household gardener, chaya, it's a South American tree spinach. It's something we are heavily punting at the moment. It is incredibly nutritious, but probably the easiest crop we've ever grown.
Yeah. And it's also, University of Florida has run many studies on it and scientifically proven that it's the most productive leaf vegetable they've ever grown. So it's a small tree. It has maple-shaped leaves about so big. You cook it as a spinach. It tastes like a spinach. A lot of your superfood greens don't taste very nice. This is a spinach. It's a mild-tasting green.
A basis is spinazie.
Yeah. So the Mayan people say if you don't have meat, then you must cook with chaya because it's so high in protein. But it's high in iron, it's high in calcium, it's got 4 times more vitamin C than oranges. It's like this ridiculous nutritious thing that you just walk past in the landscape because it looks like a bush. It's also easily grown from cuttings that you don't need to worry about a seed stage. You break pieces off, you stick it in the ground, and it's in production in a couple of months. So I mean, it's almost a dream plant. It'll grow in shade, although it's more productive in sun. It was one of the few green things we had on campus in the last heat wave. You know, it loved that heat. It just carried on growing. So you know. It's just a perfect all-rounder. But we also have had discussions about a dirty 5, which would involve chaya, but would be like a 5-pack of things that we could just promote to people. Walking onions is amongst them, and a more extended one, a dirty 12.
I love the names.
I mean, it's quick and dirty. You plant it, and
no fuss.
And no fuss, and it should be producing food quickly.